I spent my Thursday night with A24's latest experimental horror, Undertone. This is what I'd call aural horror. It's a single location film that relies mostly entirely on your ears. Well, some horror films try to overwhelm you with sensationalism. You know, bigger monsters, bigger soundtracks, bigger shocks. Undertone does the opposite. It shrinks the stage, it's a single house, a handful of characters, and a story built almost entirely on sound. The result is a small, tense, psychological horror film that leans heavily on atmosphere and performance. We follow Evie, a skeptical host of a paranormal podcast. Her show normally explores strange recordings and supposed hauntings. She is the one who questions everything. She is the skeptic. She hosts this podcast with her friend Justin. He believes in ghosts. She doesn't. Think Mulder and Scully, but with microphones. So here we are. We're talking about a horror film that doesn't rely on what you see. It relies on what you hear. In a quiet room, late at night, when every small sound suddenly matters. Today, we're taking a full spoiler look at Undertone, a small but unsettling horror film that turns sound itself into the source of fear. So let's break down what works, where it stumbles, and whether this quiet little horror film is worth hearing in the dark. We cover the film genres of sci-fi, horror, action-adventure, pop culture, and all things geek. Hi, I'm Rob, and this is A Constantly Racing Mind. Undertone was written and directed by Ian Tuason. This is his feature film debut. It's an A24 production and is due for release on March 13th, 2026. That's today, tomorrow. Here in the United States, it runs about 94 minutes, which of course is 1 hour and 34 minutes. It's a Canadian film and it's rated R. The film stars Nina Kiri as Evie. She's the podcaster. Adam DiMarco as her co-host, Justin. Michèle Duquet is Evie's mother. I think I said that right. And Kiana Lynn Bastidas as Jessa and Jeff Young as Mike. Now, Evie moves back to her childhood home to care for her dying mother. And while caring for her, Evie receives a disturbing set of audio recordings from a pregnant couple who claims something is haunting their home. At first, the tapes seem like typical paranormal material. They contain strange sounds, whispers, nursery rhymes, distorted voices. Evie begins studying the recordings for the show. Then something unsettling happens. Then the details begin to overlap with Evie's own life. That is where the film quietly shifts from investigation to psychological dread. The events described on the tapes start mirroring her own life. Each recording seems more personal, more invasive, and more dangerous to her sanity. Slowly, the film asks a nasty question. Are the recordings documenting something supernatural, or is it causing it? Most of the film rests on Nina Kiri's shoulders, and she carries it quite well. Evie spends much of the movie alone, listening, replaying audio, trying to make sense of something that may or may not be supernatural. The performance works because it stays grounded. She reacts like someone trying to stay rational even while evidence around her becomes harder to explain. That restraint keeps the film believable. The most interesting production decision is the reliance on the sound design. Instead of showing a threat, the film lets you hear it first. Small sounds, distorted voices, quiet moments where the audience strains to hear what Evie hears. Now, this technique taps into something very basic about human perception. Our brains are wired to react to unexplained noises long before we see a threat. The film uses that instinct very well. The atmosphere is this film's strongest element. The movie builds tension slowly and keeps the audience in the same confined emotional space as the main character. Now, this minimalist approach also works in its favor. Limited locations and a small cast make the story feel intimate rather than cheap. The sound design deserves special attention. It carries a large part of the storytelling. And this is where Undertone may divide the audience. The film moves slowly. Viewers expecting frequent jump scares or visible supernatural events may find it restrained, maybe boring. Much of the story unfolds through listening rather than action. The limited setting also means the narrative stays tightly focused on one perspective. For some audiences, that focus creates immersion. For others, it may feel too narrow. The production is fascinating because, despite the A24 backing, it's a micro-budget film, about $500,000, that originally made waves at the Fantasia Film Festival. Most of the cast is never actually seen. Adam DiMarco plays Evie's podcast co-host, Justin, but he's just a voice on a headset. The same goes for the couple on the recordings that drive the plot. It's a bold choice that forces you to focus on the incredible sound design by David Gertzman. If you're a fan of analog horror or found audio tropes, the vibe here is immaculate. To really understand Undertone, you have to look at it through the lens of grief-forward horror. This is a subgenre A24 has practically mastered, where the monster isn't just a creature in the dark, but a physical manifestation of trauma and loss. If you've seen films like The Babadook, you know that this isn't just a creepy book. It's about a mother's suppressed resentment. In Hereditary, the demonic cult is a proxy for the inheritance of mental illness. Even more recently, Relic used a decaying house to represent the slow, painful rot of Alzheimer's. Undertone sits comfortably on this shelf. It uses the claustrophobia of end-of-life care to prime the audience. Evie just isn't a podcast host. She's a woman trapped in a house that smells like antiseptic and old memories. The film suggests that grief creates a specific frequency, a mental undertone, that leaves us vulnerable. When we lose someone, we often find ourselves actively listening, just like Evie, obsessively replaying old voicemails or searching for meaning in silence that they left behind. In this film, that obsession is exactly what allows the demon, Abyzou, to find a way. It's not just a jump scare, it's a study on how mourning can literally haunt the room. So let's start with Abyzou. In ancient folklore, Abyzou is known as the taker of children, a female demon driven by the envy of her own infertility. The film modernizes this myth beautifully. Evie and Justin receive 10 audio files from a couple, Jessa and Mike. As they analyze them, they find that Jessa's sleep talking is actually a ritualistic undertone, a frequency hidden beneath slowed down nursery rhymes like Ba Ba Black Sheep. Well, the big twist? Evie reveals she's 6 weeks pregnant. In the mythology, Abyzou targets the unborn and infants, and by obsessively listening to these tapes, Evie is essentially inviting the abyss, which is the root of the demon's name, into her home. The religious icons her mother leaves around aren't just creepy set dressing. They're traditional wards against a specific demon. But by the time Evie listens to the 10th tape, she bypasses those protections. The film ends in a sensory blackout where the audio recordings and reality merge, implying that Evie and her unborn child have been claimed by the entity. Maybe. The end of Undertone is very ambiguous and annoying. However, because you walk away with more questions and some possible answers, your mind is racing like crazy. The film raised disturbing thoughts about some of the lore we learned as children. Because the horror of the Undertone isn't just audio, it's ancestral. As Justin and Evie are discussing the middle sound files from Jesse and Mike, they come across the legend of Santeria de Cascia, or the Black Maria of Siquijor. This is a statue in the It Wants to Be Heard teaser trailer that shows specifically the Black Maria from Our Lady of Divine Providence Church in the Philippines. In my mind, this is a massive grief-forward spoiler. Siquijor is known as the Island of Witches, Isla de Fuego. The local lore of this specific Santa Rita statue is that she walks at night. Legend has it that the caretakers often find her feet covered in mud or grass in the morning, and the statue famously holds a human skull and a crucifix. In local urban legends, the skull belonged to a man who beheaded his own wife, though the church officially denies this claim. Who is Santa Rita, you ask? Well, Santa Rita is the patron saint of impossible causes and abusive marriages. The most undertone relevant part of her life? After her husband was murdered, she prayed for her 2 sons to die rather than commit a sin of blood by avenging him. They died of dysentery shortly after. The inclusion of the Black Maria of Siquijor is the key. In Filipino lore, she is the saint who walks, but she is also a mother who chooses the death of her children over their corruption. Also, when you hear the reverse lyrics of London Bridge, You aren't just hearing a nursery rhyme. You're hearing the ritual of immurement. The film connects the ancient queen's consort's supposed child sacrifices to Evie's own unborn child. The undertone isn't just a sound, it's the vibration of those buried in the foundations of history, finally being heard through Evie's headphones. Another aspect that I want to discuss is one of the most kind of unsettling moments is the social worker's visit. We're placed in a voyeuristic position peeking into the room, but the worker figure remains a disembodied voice. It forces the question, is Evie being checked on, or is she just talking to the shadows? If a social worker isn't real, then every interaction Evie has had with the outside world is suspect. It turns the film from a haunting into a total psychological blackout. In the world of Undertone, if a voice speaks in an empty room and no one is there to see it, is it actually a person? Or just a demon finding a new frequency? The other big question I'm wrestling with is Justin's fate. Or is he just the ghost in the machine? We come to see Justin as our anchor, but his disappearance at the end is one of the film's most chilling sound design tricks. One may suppose that he was digitally consumed. During the final blackout, we hear Justin's voice fragmenting, overlapping with Abyzou's frequencies. I think that this suggests that because Justin was listening as much as Evie was, he became part of the undertone himself. He didn't die physically, he was digitized or consumed by the frequency. Or is he the imaginary anchor? A darker read suggests that Justin was never real in the present timeline. He was a pre-recorded voice or an AI assistant Evie used to cope with her isolation. When the audio breaks, he simply ceases to exist because Evie's mind can no longer maintain that illusion. We never see Justin, supposedly due to different time zones. We can assume he lives on the East Coast and Evie is with her mom on the West Coast. Yet the only interaction is around the time of the podcast, 3 a.m., Evie's time. This time, as we know, is known as the Devil's Hour. You know, the time of heightened supernatural activity. Justin never calls her cell, there's no FaceTime or video chats, just his voice, going along with Evie, but pushing back when she calls out that the recordings of Mike and Jess are probably a hoax. Yet he is the one who discovers clues that lead the two down the darker conspiracy roads. Was he real? Another thing to note is that Evie apparently used to drink quite a bit. It's never discussed, but we, as the audience, assume she is not with Darren, her boyfriend, because she left him, and not the other way around. Perhaps she just was too much for him. Evie walks up and down the stairs multiple times throughout the film. Nice clean walls, a cross at the top of the stairs. However, before the blackout at the end, there are drawings of children's stick figures everywhere on those walls. Who drew them? Evie? Which leads me once again to, how far gone was Evie? We see charcoal on Evie's fingers in the final light-up scene. The film subtly implies that Evie drew them herself during a disassociated episode. Or, does this follow the classic grief-forward trope? In her state of racing mind and sleep deprivation, she is subconsciously externalizing the undertone she's hearing. Is it the manifestation of grief becoming literal wallpaper? She isn't just hearing the ritual, her body is performing it. There is a very poignant scene almost at the very end where Evie looks up at the camera, headphones on, her hands cupping the headphones, and she confesses that she killed her mom, which is a masterpiece of psychological ambiguity. Was her mom even in the house? Or was she long gone and Evie is wrestling with her guilt? What we have at the very least is neglect is violence. Where Evie says she ignored her until she was dying or gone, she is describing passive euthanasia via grief. In her mind, her resentment and desire for a life separate from caregiving manifested as a death wish. And of course we can look at from the Abyzou parallel. Abyzou is a taker of children, but in Undertone the roles are reversed. Evie is the child who essentially takes the mother's life through neglect. Her guilt convinces her that she is the monster. By the end, she isn't even sure if the demon killed her mother or if her subconscious did the work to clear the way for her new baby. The brilliance of the ending is that we just can't trust what we see or hear. Did Evie kill her mother? Physically? No. But through the undertone of her resentment, she believes she did. And as for Justin, when the sound cuts out, he vanishes. In a movie about audio, if you can't hear a character, do they even exist? It leaves Evie and the audience in a total sensory vacuum. So, at the end of the film, we are left with, did Evie survive the demon, or did she just succumb to the loudest version of her own guilt? So I ask you, at what point did you realize Evie was holding the charcoal? Philosophically, this is a solipsistic nightmare. Evie is so isolated that her internal racing mind has become her external reality. I'm leaning toward the idea that once Evie pressed play on the first tape, her fate was sealed. The demon didn't care about her grief. It just needed a frequency and a vessel, her pregnancy. As annoying as it is, the movie feels very personal. In a deeply emotional interview with The Wrap and the Associated Press, Tuason revealed that Evie is a direct reflection of himself. The film was shot in Tuason's childhood home in Toronto, the same house where he provided end-of-life care for both of his parents. His mother died in 2020, followed by his father 2 years later. Tuason also admits that he was drinking a lot during the caregiving process to cope with the isolation. Now, this confirms the allusions to Evie's drinking are highly intentional. The undertone isn't just a demon. It's the sonic manifestation of her own darkest moments and the guilt of wanting his parents' suffering and his burden to end. She even mentions it to Justin at some point in the film. Tuason changed the character to a woman because he felt the ultimate life-altering choice was the question of having a child, which is why the Abyzou pregnancy plot is the emotional engine of the movie. Another thing Tuason did was that he studied the ratio of creeps to scares in films like The Exorcist and Paranormal Activity. He purposely used a 2-to-1 ratio to keep the audience in a state of constant active listening, mirroring the hyper-vigilance of an addict or a grieving caregiver. In another interview, this time with the AP, Tuason said something that changes how you view the whole movie. He said, "My dad passed away on Friday the 13th, and March was the last month I had with my mom." The fact that A24 released Undertone on Friday, March 13th wasn't a marketing choice. It was a coincidence that Tuason called a meaningful connection. He started as a skeptic like Evie, but became a believer through the process of making this film. When we hear those reverse nursery rhymes, we aren't just hearing a scary movie. We're hearing a man's attempt to sage his own childhood home and process the sounds of death that still linger in those walls. Now, coming out of the theater, my main takeaway is this. This is a headphone movie. While the blackout finale is an incredible theatrical experience, the tension lives in the silence. I went in expecting a typical possession flick, but what I got was a psychological study of grief and obsession. The sound design and the cinematography created an anxiety, and it was stressful to watch. Nina Kiri's performance sealed the emotional grounding. A film like this really needs to stay believable. If you're wondering how Ian Tuason managed to turn a $500,000 auditory experiment into a major Hollywood career, look no further than this recent exclusive from Bloody Disgusting. Tuason was officially tapped by James Wan and Jason Blum to direct the next Paranormal Activity. In the interview, Tuason admits he actually stole from the first Paranormal Activity while building the found audio files for Undertone, and now he's giving back by taking the franchise back to its roots. He pitched a 1-minute concept to James Wan that focuses on a serious tonal reset, moving away from the convoluted digital effects of later sequels and returning to the stripped-down claustrophobic tension of the original. Interestingly, he ruled out any VR tie-in despite his background in the medium, stating that while technology has advanced and will play a big part in the film, he is committed to a cinema language he perfected in Undertone. For fans of the grief-forward elements we've discussed, Tuason promised this reboot is written specifically for fans who miss the grounded, intimate sense of being trapped in your own home. Critics are generally positive about Undertone, which currently holds a 79 to 83% rating on Rotten Tomatoes and a 66 on Metacritic. Currently, IGN gives it about a 6 out of 10, describing the film as muted and familiar. The film is being hailed as a masterclass in tension and a near-perfect aural horror experience, though it has also sparked a divisive love it or hate it reaction among reviewers. I loved it, my wife hated it. Most critics agree that this film's strength lies in the innovative sound design and Nina Kiri's performance. So, did the hype match the horror? For me, the sound design carried the weight that the small budget couldn't show on screen. It's a solid 3.5 out of 5 for innovation, even if the pacing in the second act drags while we wait for that final tape to play. Undertone is a quiet horror film. It relies on patience and careful sound design rather than sensationalism. When it works, it creates genuine tension from very small moments. It's not trying to be the loudest horror film of the year. Instead, it explores how unsettling a story can become when the audience is forced to listen closely to what might be hiding in the background. And in horror, sometimes the most unsettling thing is not what you see. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy deep dives into sci-fi, horror, film history, and prop culture, make sure to subscribe to A Constantly Racing Mind. New videos break down the craft behind the films we love and the stories that shape them. You can also support the channel by checking out the ACRM merch store. Shirts are designed for fans of film, science fiction, and big ideas. Links are in the description. And before you head to the theater, don't forget to check out the Runtime app. It tells you the best moments to step out during a movie so you don't miss anything important. It's one of the best tools for movie lovers. Thanks again for watching. I'm Rob, and this is A Constantly Racing Mind.